Hello, everyone. My name is Peter Barker. I've been teaching for over a decade now, and I've been given the task to talk to you about Chapter 1 of this book, Essentials in Educational Psychology, 5th edition. I'm going to do things a bit differently and make the radical assumption that you've all actually read the chapter already. So instead of going over it in excruciating detail, I would like to focus on what you will need from this chapter as you transition out of the college classroom and into your own classrooms. So we'll start with a brief review of key vocabulary from the first part of the chapter and then move into the importance of this material to you as a professional. First, let's start with the chapter's big ideas. Starting with big ideas or the major concepts is a great way to organize your unit plan. And if you're going to do that, it should be something that you keep going back to as you proceed throughout your lessons. One, this helps answer that age-old question, why are we doing this? And it also helps students link specific content to the larger ideas, which is what you really want them to learn. So the big ideas of Chapter 1 are, 1. Effective teachers use research findings and research-based theories to make decisions about instructional strategies, classroom management, and assessment practices. 2. Effective teachers continually work to enhance their professional knowledge and skills. And 3. Learners read, study, and learn more efficiently when they plan appropriately and use effective strategies. The book then gives you tools to determine what kind of research to look at and what is appropriate for any given situation, which I'll cover briefly now. There are two main types of research, the first being quantitative research. Quantitative research is something that you are going to encounter fairly often in pedagogical studies. These examine things like student test scores, average classroom grades, parent questionnaires. These are all quantitative, and what quantitative studies do is provide a snapshot of the current conditions of your school or classroom. Another type of research is qualitative, which yields things like non-numeric data, values. Typically, these involve focus groups or interviews. They're very good at gauging the general atmosphere of your school or classroom. Most research, however, is going to make use of both in what's known as mixed method research. There's a table on page 8 of your book which covers these various types of studies and what they can produce in greater detail. I highly recommend you take a look at that. So what is the point of all this? The point of all this is to understand the importance of a theory, what a theory is and what it does for you. Theory, for our purposes, is an integrated set of concepts and principles that underlines the mechanisms of a phenomenon. In other words, theories are useful for explaining why things are happening. As a professional in a classroom, I want you to know that you probably are not going to be using heavy pedagogical jargon every day. You're going to mystify your students if you do that. But it is important that the decisions you make with regard to planning, classroom management, and assessment all have sound theoretical backing. At the most practical level, it demonstrates to your bosses that you know what you're doing, that you can justify your decisions. And at a more personal level, it should be important for any teacher to know that what they're doing actually works. Our second big idea is about how to develop as a teacher. All right, look. Your first year as a professional is going to be a very difficult one. For me, it was like trying to stand in a hurricane. You're going to be working on multiple plans. That's multiple lessons for multiple classrooms. You're going to have to keep on top of grading. You're going to have to learn the politics and policies and practices of your school. You're going to have to get to know your students, manage a classroom, effectively discipline, contact parents. Some days you're going to feel like you're on top of the world, and some days you're going to feel like a fraud who has no business being around children. Look, with everything you're doing, it is vitally important that you are mindful about your teaching every day so that you don't end up feeling like you're just flailing to keep your head above water. So let's take a moment to look at the recommendations the book makes about being an effective teacher, and I'll try to comment on each of them. So the first one, keep up to date on research findings. Don't feel bad if you don't spend a lot of time doing this in your first year of teaching. You're not going to have a lot of time to devour research reports. That's okay. Most schools are going to help you build your theoretical toolbox through professional development anyway, and even if they don't do that, that's what summers are for. The important thing is that you take time each year to engage with what is happening in your field and your profession. Number 2, learn as much as you can about your subject matter, your teaching strategies, and learners. And this, in my opinion, is one of the most vital things you can do as a teacher. You need to know your subject matter beyond what is in the textbook to be effective. And you need to be passionate about your subject matter. Knowing your material is essential to being creative with it, and to recognize those beautiful teachable moments when a student asks you a question that allows you to take what they're learning and apply it to a broader context. If you don't know your material, your students will know that. They will find it out. Knowing your students is also just as vital, and not just how they learn. Your school will have a learning development specialist that will provide you with paperwork called IEPs on those who have learning differences. You need to read those. You are obligated to follow the recommendations in those. But you also need an effort to get to know your students personally. You should be going to their games, going to their plays, participating in their lives. Model being a part of the school community. Your students will really, really appreciate it, even if they don't come out and say it. Number 3, learn the culture of the community you're working in. This is something you're just going to have to pick up over time. Every school has its own culture, its own special traditions, its own values. Some of those are going to be explicit. Some of those you're going to have to work to find out. And some of those values are going to be great, and some not so much. If you want to be a positive force for change in the community, you have to engage in it in ways that make sense. 4, continue to reflect on your assumptions and practices. And this, more than anything else, is what separates an adequate teacher from a great teacher. Your second year is going to be so much easier than your first, because by then you'll have a wealth of material and experience to draw upon. Just make sure that you're not making the same mistakes. Each year, as you get more comfortable, take more meaningful risks and be constantly reflecting on your work. Never let yourself settle into a routine. Number 5, and I can't stress this one enough, communicate with your colleagues. This is so important to success in your first year. You are going to be joining a community of dedicated professionals who all have a vested interest in helping kids learn. Take advantage of that knowledge, both in your particular field and outside of it. Ask for advice. Have your chair sit in on your lessons and review them and give you pointers. When you have a free period, go sit in on the class of a teacher who has a reputation of being great, of being really effective. You'll be amazed at how much you can learn through simple observation. But be taking advantage of this community that you're going to be a part of. Everyone is there for the same purpose. Believe you can make a difference in students' lives. And by the way, if you don't believe this, you really have no business in our profession. We as educators have a monumental responsibility. We can be a force for amazing good in the lives of a child, or we can just be another forgettable obstacle to their learning and growth. But the fact that you're here now, right now, watching this video or doing these classes, that shows that you can be a difference maker. You're going to have a lot of tough days in your first year. Don't give up on yourself, and don't give up on your students. And finally, integrate action research into your classroom practices. The book goes into detail on what this is, and I want to expand on this to say you should be integrating action research into every level of your profession. You're going to find problems at the school you work at. There are going to be obstacles to learning that people who have been there a lot longer than you don't see because they're just used to them being there. Action research is the most effective way to bring a problem to the attention of the administration and to see that it gets fixed. Identify the problem, use formal data collection to lay out the problem, and then lay out an action plan. Using formal data collection shows you have clear evidence of the problem, and creating a realistic action plan shows that the problem can be solved. In the past, I and my colleagues have used action research to rewrite entire curricula, decolonize reading lists, even create new classes from scratch. And none of this would have happened if we just sat back and complained about the problem. So the final part of this chapter, detail strategies for effective studying and learning, which I've summarized here. The main thing that I want to stress is that we leave this chapter with the understanding of the importance of effective modeling. If you expect your students to work and study effectively, you should be willing to model that. If you expect your students to listen respectfully, you need to model that. If you want your students to take notes, well, you get the idea. This is going to require that you always be mindful of your actions while you're at school. You're always on stage. You're always in front of an audience. Everything you do, from the way you greet your students in the morning to the way you pack up your classes at the end of the day or the end of a period, is showing your students how adults act in the real world. And this sounds daunting and scary, but it's really not. You already have these skills. Studies have shown that most teachers were also effective learners in school. What this really requires is that you be self-aware and that you be mindful. And having self-awareness is the essential part of self-efficacy. Look, believe me, if I can do it, you can too. You're going to be great. Hey, thanks for watching, and if you have any questions or comments, please leave them below or attach them to the assignment page for this lesson. Thanks again.